Hello, welcome to Green and Gold Greats, an exciting hour-long series on cassette featuring the great personalities and the great moments of Australian sporting history. There are 6 programs in all, and we've made every effort to obtain the valuable and historic film of yesteryear going back more than 80 years. And David, you name it, we've got it.
You're so true, Norman, because in 1905, even though cricket started in the 1300s, cinematography came into being with these Lord shots, and they are magnificent. You can see from Joe Darling's team here, the gear of the year was quite remarkable, both on the field and off the field. And without doubt, this was something that was quite historic. And to be able to look round and see the likes of Joe Darling, without any shadow of doubt, one of Australia's greatest cricketers, and yet they could still act the goat just as they can in the 80s. And as you can see from these very, very funny shots, it didn't matter whether this was cinematography at its first or its last. And as Joe Darling shown here, bushy moustache and just as aggressive with the bat. And the ladies, well, they must have taken hours to get ready with all the garb they wore in those days. But it certainly was a social event. As for Monty Noble, he became an Australian captain, as did Warwick Armstrong in the 1920s, and without doubt, one of the more powerful batsmen that Australia has produced. Victor Trumper made his mark very, very early in the piece with some powerful hitting, and as with Clem Hill, he too became another Australian captain, a left-hander who could certainly punish the ball. They were the forerunners to the man who, without doubt, became the greatest cricketer the world has ever seen, this man, Donald George Bradman. Born on the 27th of August 1908, the same year that Monty Noble captained Australia, and it's rather fitting that the M.A. Noble stand and the Bradman stand are side by side at the northern end of the famous Sydney cricket ground. But all Bradman's early days were spent here in Barrel, southwest of Sydney, where he literally lived cricket every moment of the day that he could lay his hands on. And with a stump in his hand and a golf ball off the tank in the back of the house, here he is practicing for umpteen hours, honing those magnificent pieces of batsmanship that was always there just to be honed. And he made sure that every given hour was there to do just that. And that wasn't enough either, because Bradman always believed that fielding was just as important. And so the back fence became, with the golf ball, his area for honing those very important parts of his fielding ability. With the onlookers and the back fence, Bradman again spent hours not only with his fielding but with his batting, as we've seen, and making sure that every piece made these shots possible. The precision, the power and the placement that was to make people right around the cricketing world rise to their feet and acclaim this magnificent man with the blade. And without doubt, here is a man we can look back over the years and say, thank you, Sir Donald, for the shots that you have given us all round the world, and the power into the fence where 4 after 4 was a general entry into the scorebook. There you have the greatest player who ever lived. 1930 was the first year that the Don toured England, and it was also the first time that sound came onto film. And this magnificent piece of commentary, an original piece, the delightfully droll commentary of the expert, in other words, listen closely to the second voice as we shoot into the 1930s and sound on film.
This is Archie Jackson, the youngster, you know.
Yes.
Made a century in his first test against us in Australia.
Oh, yes. I like his style very much.
Yes, he's playing very cautiously. It's his first time on an English wicket.
Oh, yes. That's a lovely stroke.
Another newcomer to English cricket, Don Bradman. Holds the world's batting record.
Oh, yes.
And the Don said, oh yes too, as he peeled off 236 in that opening game at Worcester. But it wasn't all beer and skittles for the champion, because the bodyline series where Harold Lowe had bowled so many short pitch bounces to the heart with dismissals such as this, with the Don getting caught at silly leg, that it really was quite a miserable series. But there was no doubting that the Don was going to create history as far as Australian cricket was concerned. And no Australian cricketer had ever scored 100 hundreds. And this was to be the day. Batting with Keith Miller, the flamboyant all-rounder, the Don went out to move into history and make a niche for himself that no other Australian has managed to do. There was one very excited youngster in this crowd, and it was me. Sitting on my father's shoulders in front of the Sheridan stand, it was marvellous to be a part of history and watch the Don make absolute mincemeat of the Indian attack. And as he moved serenely towards his century with ones and twos, backed up by Miller batting so superbly, it really was an atmosphere that will long live in the memory of a capacity crowd. Once the Don got to 99, you could almost hear a pin drop. And as he moved serenely towards that figure, the climactic scene is something that anyone who could possibly be associated with sport can turn around and say, this was a great hour. And there's the 99 with Keith Miller on 59, and Kishan Shan was brought on to bowl. He bowled a wide, which relieved a bit of the tension, but then he dished up a lollipop onto the leg side, and the Don said, thank you very much, and the whole crowd erupted. And when you get 100 hundreds, and so few people have done it, and why not? The Don had made his niche, and as he saluted the crowd, no one was happier than Keith Miller, and he will recall that in his many moments of talking of this great player's abilities. The Don and Keith Miller shake hands, the hill erupts, and history has been made. But the Don's last test innings at the Oval in Surrey proved to be a disaster, requiring 4 runs to average 100 in his test career, something nobody believed ever possible. Despite the accolades from the English team and the crowd, the Don was bowled for a duck by Eric Hollies around the wicket. It's just inconceivable that in such a magnificent career that the Don couldn't manage those 4 runs. And it's worthwhile recalling that ball again in slow motion because to me it is the most famous ball that was ever bowled. The mere fact that Hollies bowled around the wicket was extraordinary in itself. But for the Don, despite the fact that he probably had tears in his eyes from the wonderful reception he got from both player and crowd, literally was bowled neck and crop. And therefore, his career average stood at 99.94, something that probably never equalled while the game is played. But the Don wasn't to be deterred. He returned to Melbourne for his testimonial at the MCG to a rousing reception. And nobody doubted for one moment that he wasn't going to score a century in this, his last major game in Australia, before he retired. Again, the cheers, and the cream of Australian cricket was on hand, and it didn't matter who bowled that day, the Don flayed the attack. And you will see in these clips some of the vintage Bradman that you will ever see, the way he smashed that through the covers. Who would ever want to be a bowler in this particular era when the Don was in full cry? He got to the stage where not only did the crowd rise to its feet in frenzy, but he had bowlers looking for places to hide. So embarrassing it was for the Don to flay this type of attack. It didn't matter who bowled this day, it was destined to be the Don's day. And no more fitting ground in Australia could celebrate a century by this magnificent cricketer. He flayed this attack from one end to the other, finding every particular hole that was there and some that weren't. And it didn't matter whether it was on the onside or the offside, the crowd at the MCG were treated to vintage Bradman. But there could have been a disaster. Once the Don reached 97, he skied the ball to mid-wicket and could have been caught. But thankfully, it was kicked forward and the Don scored 3 runs and was able to reach that coveted century. And what better way to do it with a grin on his face and a raise of the cap than to shake the hand of Lindsay Hassett, the opposition captain who came in to say, well played, the Don. So that's Donald Bradman, without any shadow of a doubt, the greatest cricketer who ever lived. And the crowd at the MCG rose to their feet when he was eventually out, caught in the deep by Neil Harvey at deep extra cover. And as was so often the case, the Don ran all the way from the wicket to the dressing room. And you would think, after scoring a century, that he would be a little tired. But the crowd loved him. They loved the fact that he scored a century. And as Ray Robinson, the title of his magnificent book of Brightly Fades the Don, we can look to him and say thank you, Sir Donald, as he is known now for being the magnificent cricketer that you've been. You've given heaps of pleasure, and without doubt, a test career average of 99.94 will take one hell of a lot of beating.